I was 32 years old when I found the adoption papers hidden in a dusty box in my mom's attic. 32 years of believing I knew who I was, where I came from, and why I had my mother's green eyes. But those yellow documents, tucked between old Christmas decorations and forgotten photo albums, shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. My hands trembled as I read my birth mother's name, a name I'd never heard before. And when I confronted my mom that evening, she broke down and told me a truth so devastating, so beautiful, and so complicated that it would change both of our lives forever. Let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't really begin in that attic. It begins 32 years ago in a small hospital in Ohio, where a 17-year-old girl named Sarah made the most painful decision of her young life. But I didn't know any of that when I climbed those creaky attic stairs on a Saturday morning in October. I was just looking for Halloween decorations. My wife, Jessica, and I had just bought our first house, and I'd volunteered to grab some of the old decorations from my childhood that Mom said I could have. She'd been storing them for years, always saying, "When you get your own place, these are yours." Well, we finally had our own place, and I was ready to deck it out with those plastic jack-o'-lanterns and the slightly terrifying witch that used to guard our front porch every October. Mom's attic was exactly how I remembered it from childhood: dusty, cramped, and filled with the accumulated memories of decades. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, labeled in my mother's careful handwriting: Christmas 1995, David's baby clothes, kitchen items, and so on. I found a Halloween box pretty quickly, but as I was pulling it down, I knocked over another box that wasn't labeled at all. The contents spilled across the wooden floor: old papers, folders, and a manila envelope that looked like it had been sealed and reopened many times over the years. I'm not usually a snoop. I respect people's privacy, even my mom's. But something about that envelope called to me. Maybe it was the way it was worn at the edges, like it had been handled countless times. Maybe it was the fact that it was hidden in an unmarked box, separate from everything else. Whatever it was, I picked it up, and before I could talk myself out of it, I opened it. Inside were documents. Official-looking documents with seals and signatures. I pulled them out, my heart already starting to beat faster, even though I didn't know why. And then I saw the words at the top of the first page: Certificate of Adoption, State of Ohio. My name was on it: David James Richardson. But the name listed as birth mother wasn't Linda Richardson, the woman I'd called Mom my entire life. It was Sarah Mitchell, a name I'd never heard before, a stranger's name. I sat down hard on the attic floor, dust motes swirling in the shaft of sunlight coming through the small window. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake. This had to be someone else's paperwork, mixed in with our family documents by accident. But no, there was my birth date, April 15th, 1991. There was my birth weight and time. This was me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers as I shuffled through them. There were more documents, medical records, a letter from an adoption agency, photographs I'd never seen before. One photo showed a teenage girl with long dark hair holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The girl looked impossibly young, her eyes red from crying. On the back, written in faded ink, Sarah and David, 1 day old. I don't know how long I sat there in that attic. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to have stopped. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, was suddenly called into question. If Linda wasn't my biological mother, who else knew? Did my dad know before he died? Did my aunts and uncles know? Had everyone been lying to me my entire life? The rational part of my brain tried to kick in. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Mom had been planning to tell me and just never found the right time. Maybe she thought it didn't matter because she'd raised me and loved me, and that's what made her my real mother. But the emotional part of my brain, the part that felt betrayed and confused and angry, was much louder. I gathered all the papers, put them back in an envelope, and climbed down from the attic. I left the Halloween decorations where they were. Suddenly, plastic jack-o'-lanterns seemed incredibly unimportant. I sat in my car in Mom's driveway for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront her right now? Should I go home and process this first? Should I call Jessica? I pulled out my phone 3 times to text my wife, but I couldn't figure out what to say. Hey, honey, just found out I'm adopted. How's your day going? Finally, I decided I couldn't wait. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I walked back to the front door and let myself in. Mom was in the kitchen, as she always was on Saturday mornings, working on her weekly meal prep. The smell of her homemade spaghetti sauce filled the house, a smell that had meant comfort and safety my entire life. Now it just made me feel sick. David, she said, smiling when she saw me. That was quick. Did you find the... She stopped mid-sentence when she saw my face. Then her eyes dropped to the envelope in my hand, and all the color drained from her face. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd known for 32 years. David, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the bubbling sauce on the stove. She turned off the burner with shaking hands. Who's Sarah Mitchell? I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, cold and distant, like it belonged to someone else. Mom closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there were tears streaming down her face. Oh, David. Oh, sweetheart. I always knew this day would come. I kept telling myself I'd tell you when you were ready, and then you seemed so happy, and I didn't want to disrupt your life, and then your father died, and it never seemed like the right time, and... Who is Sarah Mitchell? I repeated, more firmly this time. Mom pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down heavily, like her legs couldn't support her anymore. She gestured for me to sit across from her, but I remained standing. I needed to feel in control of something, even if it was just my physical position in the room. Sarah Mitchell is your birth mother, Mom said quietly, her hands clasped tightly on the table. She was 17 years old when she got pregnant with you. She was a junior in high school, a good student, had her whole life ahead of her. The father, your biological father, was 18, a senior. They were in love, or at least they thought they were. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. I stood there, frozen, as Mom continued. The story spilled out of her like she'd been holding it in for decades, which of course she had. Your father and I had been trying to have a baby for years, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We'd done fertility treatments, tried everything. We were told it was unlikely we'd ever have biological children. We were devastated. We'd always wanted to be parents, and it seemed like that dream was slipping away from us. So we started looking into adoption. She paused, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. We went through an agency, filled out all the paperwork, went through the home studies, the interviews, everything. And then one day we got a call. There was a young woman who was pregnant and looking for a family to adopt her baby. She wanted to meet us before making a decision. That young woman was Sarah. Mom stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where I played as a child. We met her at a cafe. She was so young, David. Just a kid herself, really. But she was so brave. She told us about her situation, about how she wanted to finish school, go to college, make something of her life. She said she knew she couldn't give her baby the life he deserved, not at 17. She wanted her son to have 2 parents, a stable home, opportunities she couldn't provide. We talked for hours. Mom continued, turning back to face me. She asked us about our lives, our values, what kind of parents we'd be. She wanted to know everything. And by the end of that meeting, she said she'd made her decision. She wanted us to be your parents. I finally sat down, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. This was all too much to process. So you adopted me as a baby? Yes, Mom said, sitting back down across from me. Sarah was in her 3rd trimester when we met. We were there for her throughout the rest of her pregnancy. We went to doctor's appointments with her, helped her prepare. And we were there in the hospital when you were born. The moment I held you, David, you became my son. Not legally yet. That took a few months to finalize. But in every way that mattered, you were mine. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. Why did you let me believe you were my biological mother? Why did you lie to me for 32 years? Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. I didn't mean to lie, sweetheart. In the beginning, when you were a baby, it didn't seem necessary to explain. And then as you got older, your father and I kept saying we'd tell you when the time was right. We read books about it, talked to counselors. Everyone said there was no perfect age, that we'd know when it felt right. but it never felt right. You were so happy, so well-adjusted. We didn't want to confuse you or make you feel different. Make me feel different? I repeated incredulously. I'm different. My entire identity is based on a lie. It's not a lie, Mom said firmly, reaching across the table toward me. I pull my hands back. You are my son, David. I raised you. I was there for your first word, your first step, your first day of school. I held you when you were sick, cheered at your baseball games, helped you with your homework, taught you to drive. I loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I've loved you every single day since. Biology doesn't change that. But you should have told me, I said, my voice breaking. I had a right to know. You're absolutely right, Mom said, tears flowing freely now. You did have a right to know, and I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. Your father and I both made a mistake. Every year that passed, it got harder to find the words. We were scared. Scared that you'd feel betrayed. Scared that you'd be angry. Scared that you'd want to find Sarah and that we'd lose you. And I know that was selfish. I know we should have put your needs above our fears. But we're just people, David. Imperfect people who loved you so much that we made a terrible decision trying to protect you. I stared at the table, unable to look at her. My mind was spinning with questions. Does Sarah know about me? Did she ever try to contact me? Mom nodded slowly. She knows about you. We had what's called a semi-open adoption. We sent her updates and photos through the agency for the first few years. Nothing that would reveal our identity or location, but enough so she could know you were safe and happy. She wrote letters back, telling us to tell you someday that she loved you and that giving you up was the hardest thing she ever did. The agency kept those letters for you. I have them upstairs. There are letters? I could barely breathe. She wrote me letters, and you never gave them to me? The agreement was that you'd receive them when you were ready, when we told you about the adoption. I have them all, David. I've saved every single one. I've read them so many times, preparing for the day when I'd have to hand them over and answer your questions. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need to go. I can't do this right now. David, please, Mom said, standing up too. Don't leave like this. Let's talk about it. Ask me anything you want to know. I want to know why, I said, my voice rising. Why you thought you had the right to keep this from me. Why you decided that your comfort was more important than my truth. Why you let me go 32 years thinking I knew who I was when you knew it was all built on a foundation of secrets. I know you're angry, Mom said, her voice steady despite her tears. You have every right to be. But please, David, don't let this destroy everything we have. I'm still your mother. I'm still the person who loves you more than anything in this world. This news doesn't change that. It changes everything, I said coldly. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I need the letters. All of them. And any other information you have about Sarah. About my biological father. About my real family. Mom flinched at the words real family, but she nodded. I'll get everything together. Just, please, when you're ready to talk, come back. I'll answer any question you have. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't respond. I just walked out the door, got in my car, and drove. I didn't go home to Jessica. I wasn't ready to explain this to her yet. Instead, I drove to the park where Dad used to take me when I was a kid. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond where we'd fed the ducks every Sunday morning, and I let myself fall apart. My dad, the man I'd called Dad my entire life, had died 5 years ago from a heart attack. He'd been my hero, my role model, the person I'd wanted to be like when I grew up. And now I'd never get to ask him about any of this. I'd never get to hear his side of the story, never get to understand why he'd made the choice to keep this secret. That loss hit me all over again, fresh and sharp. As I sat there, I pulled out the envelope and looked at the photo again. Sarah Mitchell, 17 years old, holding baby me. She looked so young, so scared, so sad. Who was she? Where was she now? Did she ever think about me? Did she wonder how I turned out? And who was my biological father? The documents mentioned him briefly. James Cooper, 18 years old. But there was no other information. Did he know about me? Did he care? Did I have half-siblings somewhere? Grandparents? A whole other family that didn't know I existed? My phone buzzed. It was Jessica. Where are you? Your mom called and said you left upset. What's going on? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I'm at the park. Need some time. We'll explain everything when I get home. She responded immediately. I'm worried. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. I love you. That made me cry harder. Jessica and I had been together for 8 years, married for 4. She was my rock, my partner, my best friend. How was I supposed to explain this to her? How was I supposed to explain that I didn't even know who I was anymore? I stayed at that park until it got dark. When I finally drove home, Jessica was waiting at the door. She took one look at my face and pulled me into her arms without saying a word. We stood there in the doorway for several minutes, her holding me while I tried to find the words to explain what had happened. When we finally went inside, I told her everything. I showed her the documents, the photos, the adoption certificate. Jessica listened without interrupting, her hand holding mine the entire time. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, processing it all. What do you want to do? She finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to find Sarah, to meet her, to ask her a million questions. Part of me is terrified of what I might find. Part of me is so angry at my mom, at Linda, for keeping this from me. And part of me feels guilty for being angry because she's been a great mother, and this revelation doesn't change all the years of love and care she gave me. Jessica nodded. You can feel all of those things at once, you know? Emotions aren't mutually exclusive. You can be angry and grateful. You can love Linda and still want to know Sarah. You can be curious and scared at the same time. I just feel so lost, I said. Like my entire identity has been called into question. I don't know who I am anymore. You're the same person you were yesterday, Jessica said gently. You're kind, funny, hardworking, loyal. You're an amazing husband. You're good to your friends and family. None of that has changed. You just have more information about your story now. More pieces of the puzzle. But what if the new pieces don't fit? I asked. What if I find out things about my biological parents that I don't want to know? What if Sarah doesn't want to meet me? What if she has a whole new life, and I'm just a painful reminder of a mistake she made when she was 17? Those are all possibilities, Jessica acknowledged. But you won't know unless you try. And I think the not knowing might be worse than whatever you might find out. The questions will always be there, eating at you, unless you try to find some answers. She was right, of course. She usually was. But that didn't make it any easier. Over the next few days, I was a mess. I couldn't focus at work. I barely slept. Every time I looked in the mirror, I found myself searching for features that might have come from Sarah or from James Cooper. Did I have Sarah's nose? James's jawline? Were there genetic traits or medical conditions I should know about? I avoided my mom's calls. She texted me every day. I love you. I'm here when you're ready to talk. But I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. A week after finding the papers, Mom showed up at my house with a large box. Jessica answered the door and invited her in, despite my protests. The two of them had always had a good relationship, and Jessica believed, correctly, that we needed to have this conversation. Mom looked terrible. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying nonstop. She lost weight. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in a week. Part of me felt vindicated. She should feel bad for what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that had loved her my whole life, wanted to comfort her. I brought everything, Mom said, setting the box on the coffee table. All the letters from Sarah, medical records, information about your biological father, everything the agency gave us. It's all yours. I stared at the box like it might explode. Inside were answers to questions I've been asking myself for a week, but suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Jessica sat down next to me and put her hand on my knee, a silent show of support. Mom sat down in the chair across from us, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David, before you go through that box, I need to tell you the rest of the story. The parts that aren't in the documents. The parts that only I know. I nodded, unable to find my voice. Mom took a deep breath and began. Sarah Mitchell was an extraordinary young woman. When we met her, we were struck by how mature she was for 17, how thoughtful and articulate. She told us about her dreams. She wanted to be a teacher, wanted to help kids from difficult backgrounds, wanted to make a difference. She came from a single-parent home herself. Her mother worked 2 jobs to support her and her younger brother. They didn't have much money, but they had love and determination. When Sarah got pregnant, She said it felt like all her dreams were slipping away. The baby's father, James, wanted to try to make it work. He was willing to drop his college plans, get a job, help raise the baby. But Sarah said no. She told us she loved James, but she knew they were too young. She knew that if they tried to parent at 18 and 17, they'd end up resenting each other and resenting the baby. She wanted better for her child. She wanted better for herself. So she made the impossible decision to give you up. Mom's voice cracked, but she continued. The day you were born was the most beautiful and most heartbreaking day I'd ever experienced. Sarah was in labor for 14 hours. I was there with her, holding her hand, coaching her breathing. Your father was there too, pacing in the waiting room. When you finally came into this world, screaming and perfect, they put you in Sarah's arms first. That was part of the plan. She wanted to hold you, to say goodbye properly. Tears were streaming down Mom's face now, and I felt my own eyes burning. She held you for an hour, David. She counted your fingers and toes, kissed your forehead, whispered things to you that I couldn't hear. And then, with more strength and courage than I've ever seen in anyone before or since, she handed you to me. She said, "This is David. Please love him enough for both of us." And then she turned her face to the wall and sobbed. I couldn't hold back my own tears anymore. Jessica was crying too, her hand gripping mine tightly. The agency gave Sarah 3 days to change her mind. Mom continued. Those are the longest 3 days of my life. Your father and I stayed at a hotel near the hospital with you, falling more in love with you every hour, but terrified that Sarah would decide to keep you. We wouldn't have blamed her if she did. But on the 3rd day, she signed the papers. She gave you to us permanently. Did you ever see her again? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mom nodded. Once, when you were 6 months old, she requested a meeting through the agency. We brought you to a park, and she held you for about an hour. She cried the whole time. She told us that finishing that semester of school had been the hardest thing she'd ever done because all she could think about was you. But she was doing it. She was going to graduate, going to go to college, going to honor the sacrifice she'd made by making something of herself. She made us promise that we'd tell you someday that she loved you, that giving you up wasn't because she didn't want you, but because she wanted you to have everything she couldn't give you. That was the last time? I asked. The last time I saw her in person, yes. But the agency kept us in contact through letters for years. Sarah wrote to you every year on your birthday. She sent updates about her life, told you what she hoped you were learning and experiencing at each age. She sent a letter when she graduated high school, when she graduated college, when she got her first teaching job. Every letter ended the same way. I love you, and I think about you every day. Mom reached in a box and pulled out a thick bundle of envelopes, tied together with a ribbon. These are for you. I've read them all more times than I can count, preparing for this day. I wanted to understand her, to be ready to answer your questions. And every time I read them, I'm reminded of one incredible gift she gave me. Because of her sacrifice, I got to be a mother. I got to have you. I took the bundle with shaking hands. There had to be 30 or 40 letters here, spanning my entire life. Why did the letters stop? I asked, noticing that the most recent one was dated about 5 years ago. Mom's face fell. The letters didn't stop. She kept writing. But 5 years ago, the adoption agency closed. They'd been struggling financially for years, and they finally shut down. We lost contact after that. I tried to find her, but Sarah Mitchell is a common name, and I didn't want to hire a private investigator or do anything that might feel like stalking. I figured if she wanted to find us, she could, but she never did. I don't know if that means she moved on and built a new life, or if she's still out there somewhere, thinking about you and wishing she knew how to reach you. I sat there holding the letters, feeling the weight of them, both physical and emotional. These were words from a woman I'd never met, a woman who'd given me life and then given me away so I could have a better life. I didn't know whether to be grateful or angry or sad. Maybe I was all three. There's one more thing, Mom said quietly. She pulled out another envelope from the box, this one newer and unmarked. I wrote you a letter too. I started the day we brought you home from the hospital, and I've added to it over the years. It explains everything I was thinking and feeling, all the times I almost told you and couldn't find the words. all my fears and regrets. You don't have to read it now. You don't have to read it ever if you don't want to. But I wanted you to have it. I took that envelope too, setting it on top of Sarah's letters. What about my biological father? I asked. James Cooper. What happened to him? Mom pulled out a folder from the box. According to the information the agency had, James went to college as planned. He and Sarah broke up shortly after you were born. It was too painful for both of them to stay together when they'd given up their child. The agency had his contact information at the time of the adoption, but I don't know if it's still current. That's all in here. There's also medical history for both Sarah and James's families, which I should have given you years ago. I'm sorry, David. If there are genetic conditions you should have known about, if this information could have helped you or your doctors in any way, I'm so sorry for keeping it from you. Jessica spoke up for the first time. Linda, can I ask you something? Not to be confrontational, but because I'm trying to understand. You said you planned to tell David when he was ready. When did you think he'd be ready? What was the plan? Mom looked at Jessica gratefully, like she was glad someone was asking the logical questions. Honestly, we thought we'd tell him before he became a parent himself. Your father and I talked about it many times. We thought that when David was about to have his own child, he'd understand better. He'd understand the depth of love that goes into making impossible decisions for your children. We thought it would be easier for him to forgive us if he was standing on the precipice of parenthood himself, understanding how scary and overwhelming it is to be responsible for another life. She looked at me with fresh tears. But then your father died, and I couldn't do it alone. I kept thinking, how can I drop this bomb on David when he's grieving his father? And then time kept passing, and it got harder and harder to find the right moment. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, I tell myself this is the year I'll tell him, and then I'd chicken out. I was a coward, David. I chose my own comfort over your right to know your story, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, I said, I need time. I need to process all of this, read these letters, figure out what I want to do next. I can't promise I won't still be angry. I can't promise this won't change our relationship, but I can promise I'll try to understand. Mom nodded, more tears falling. That's all I can ask for. Take all the time you need. I'll be here whenever you're ready. And David, she stood up, preparing to leave. I know I have no right to ask this, but please be gentle with yourself as you go through all this. Don't let this shake your sense of who you are. You're an incredible man, and that's because of your own choices and character, not because of biology or DNA. Whether I gave birth to you or not doesn't change the fact that you're my son, and I'm proud of every single thing you've become. After she left, Jessica and I sat staring at the box for a long time. Do you want to be alone when you read the letters? She asked. I shook my head. No, I need you here. I can't do this alone. We spent the rest of that evening reading Sarah's letters. They were beautiful and heartbreaking. In the first few letters, written when I was a baby, her grief was raw and overwhelming. She wrote about the physical pain of her milk coming in when there was no baby to feed, about seeing babies in strollers and breaking down in grocery stores, about wondering every moment of every day if she'd made the right choice. But as the letters progressed, as I got older and she moved forward with her life, they became less about her pain and more about her hopes for me. She wrote about graduating high school at the top of her class, about getting a scholarship to Ohio State University. She wrote about her education classes, about how every lesson on child development made her think of me and wonder what I was learning, how I was growing. When I was 5 and she was 22, she wrote about getting her first teaching job at an elementary school in Columbus. She wrote, Today I met my first class of 3rd graders, and I looked at each one of their faces and thought, David is about this age now. I wondered if you're in kindergarten, if you're learning to read, if you love books like I do. I wondered if your parents are reading to you every night like my mom read to me. I hope they are. I hope they're giving you all the magic and wonder of stories and imagination. That letter destroyed me because I remembered being 5 years old. I remembered Mom reading to me every night, doing different voices for all the characters, making reading feel like the most exciting adventure in the world. I'd become a voracious reader because of those nights, because of Mom's dedication to fostering my love of books. Sarah had hoped for that, and Mom had delivered. When I was 13 and Sarah was 30, she wrote about getting married to a man named Michael who was also a teacher. She wrote, "I wondered if I should tell Michael about you, and I decided I had to. A love built on secrets isn't really love at all." When I told him, he held me while I cried, and he said that giving you up for adoption was the bravest thing he'd ever heard of anyone doing. He said it showed what kind of person I am, that I can put someone else's needs above my own desires. He said he's proud to know me. I hope someday you'll feel the same way. When I was 18 and graduating high school, Sarah wrote the longest letter. She wrote about how she'd thought about me constantly that spring, wondering if I was excited or scared about graduation, whether I was going to college, what I wanted to do with my life. She wrote about her own high school graduation, how bittersweet it had been because she'd accomplished what she set out to do after giving me up, but how hollow it felt without being able to share it with the son she still loved and missed every day. The most recent letter was dated 5 years ago, shortly before the adoption agency closed. I would have been 27. Sarah wrote about how she and Michael had struggled with infertility for years, and how they'd finally accepted that they might not have children. She wrote, "It feels like cosmic justice in a way. I gave away the only child I've ever had, and now I can't have more. I don't know if you believe in karma, David, but sometimes I wonder if this is mine. But I don't regret giving you up. Even now, even with the pain of infertility, I know I made the right choice for you. I was 17, barely more than a child myself. You deserved more than I could give you. I hope you got it. I hope you're happy. That's all I've ever wanted for you." By the time we finished reading all the letters, it was past midnight. Jessica and I were both emotionally exhausted, our eyes swollen from crying. But I felt something shifting inside me. Sarah wasn't a stranger anymore. She was a real person who'd made an impossible choice and had lived with the consequences every day for 32 years. She'd sacrificed her own desires so I could have a better life, and then she'd build a good life for herself anyway. She'd honored the choice she made by becoming exactly who she'd wanted to be, a teacher, a person who helped children, someone who made a difference. I still had questions. I still needed to process the fact that my mom had kept this from me for so long. But I also understood, in a way I hadn't before, that adoption is complicated. It's not a simple story of rejection or abandonment. It's a story of love, multiple types of love, all valid, all real, all important. Over the next few weeks, I slowly reconnected with Mom. We had long, difficult conversations about why she and Dad had made the choices they made. She apologized over and over, and I slowly began to forgive her. I read her letter, the one she'd been writing to me since I was born, and I saw the fear and love and uncertainty that had guided her decisions. She wasn't a villain. She was just a flawed human being who'd made mistakes while trying to do her best. But I also knew I needed to find Sarah. I needed to meet her, to thank her, to tell her that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. I'd had a good life. I'd been loved. I'd gotten all the opportunities she'd hoped for me. Jessica and I hired a private investigator, and within 2 weeks, they found her. Sarah Mitchell Reynolds was still teaching 3rd grade in Columbus, still married to Michael. They'd eventually adopted 2 children of their own, siblings from foster care. According to the investigator's report, she was well respected in her community, beloved by her students, by all accounts living a good life. The investigator provided her phone number and address, and then it was up to me. I stared at that phone number for days, picking up the phone and setting it down a dozen times. What would I say? How do you introduce yourself to the woman who gave birth to you, but hasn't seen you since you were 6 months old? What if she didn't want to hear from me? What if I was opening old wounds that she'd carefully stitched closed over the past 32 years? Finally, Jessica said, "David, you'll never know unless you try. The worst thing that can happen is she says she's not ready to meet you. But what if the best thing happens? What if she's been hoping for this call for 32 years? She was right. So one Saturday morning, I took a deep breath and dialed the number. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello." "Hi," I said, my voice shaking. "Is this Sarah Mitchell Reynolds?" "Yes, this is Sarah." "Who's calling?" I closed my eyes, gathering my courage. "My name is David Richardson. I was born on April 15th, 1991. I think you might be my birth mother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath, almost a sob. "David," she whispered. "Oh my God. David? Is it really you?" "It's really me," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I found the adoption papers a few weeks ago. My mom, Linda, she told me everything. I read all your letters, every single one. And I needed to call you. I needed to tell you that I'm okay, that I had a good life, that everything you hoped for me came true." Sarah was crying now, openly sobbing on the other end of the line. "I've dreamed about this moment for 32 years. I've imagined 1,000 times what I'd say if you ever found me. But now that you're actually here, actually talking to me, I can't find any words. All I can say is I'm sorry, and I love you, and I've thought about you every single day since the day you were born." "I know," I said. "I read it in your letters. Sarah, you don't have anything to apologize for. You gave me a gift. You gave me to parents who loved me and raised me well. You sacrificed your own desires so I could have opportunities you couldn't give me at 17. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to be proud of." We talked for 2 hours that first call. She told me about her life, about Michael and their adopted children, my half-siblings in a way. She told me about her teaching career, about how she'd specialized in working with at-risk kids, because she'd never forgotten what it felt like to be a scared teenager with impossible choices. She told me that giving me up had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but also the thing she was most at peace with because she'd done it out of love. I told her about my life, about growing up with Linda and my dad, about my career in software engineering, about Jessica, and our plans to start families soon. I told her about finding the papers in the attic, about the initial anger and confusion, about slowly coming to understand the complexity of the choice she'd made. At the end of the call, I asked her if she'd be willing to meet in person. There was no hesitation in her answer. "I would love nothing more," she said. "I've been waiting 32 years for this." We met 2 weeks later at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I got there early, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. Jessica was with me, providing moral support. When Sarah walked in, I knew her immediately. She looked older than the 17-year-old girl in the photo, of course, but she had the same dark hair, the same eyes. And I could see myself in her face, the shape of my nose, the set of my jaw, the way my eyes crinkled when I smiled. She saw me and stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears were already streaming down her face. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, 32 years of separation and longing hanging in the air between us. Then she walked toward me, and I stood up, and we embraced. She was shorter than I'd imagined, and I had to bend down to hug her properly. She held me tight, crying into my shoulder, and I cried too. 32 years of wondering, 32 years of hoping, 32 years of love that had nowhere to go. All of it was pouring out in that moment. "You're so tall," she finally said, laughing through her tears. "And so handsome. Oh, David, look at you. Look at the man you've become." We sat down and talked for hours. Sarah's husband, Michael, was there too, sitting quietly and letting us have our reunion, but providing support to Sarah when she needed it. I liked him immediately. He had kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, and it was clear he loved Sarah deeply. I showed Sarah pictures of my life, my wedding photos, pictures of me with Linda and my dad, photos of Jessica and me traveling, living our life. She looked at each one carefully, crying and laughing and asking questions. "Your mom, Linda, she did a beautiful job raising you," Sarah said, looking at a photo of me and Linda at my college graduation. "I chose well. I knew it when I met her, and I'm so glad I was right. You can tell just from these photos how much she loves you." "She does," I agreed. "And she's sorry she didn't tell me sooner. We're working through it." "Tell her I understand," Sarah said. "Tell her I don't blame her for being scared. Adoption is complicated. There's no rule book for how to handle these things. We all just do the best we can with impossible situations." Before we parted that day, Sarah gave me something. It was a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. Inside was a hospital bracelet, the one I'd worn as a newborn, and a tiny footprint card from the day I was born. She kept them all these years, the only physical mementos she had of me. "I want you to have these," she said. They belong with you. They always have. I held the box carefully, overcome with emotion. These simple objects represented the beginning of my life, the brief time Sarah and I had together before she made her impossible choice. Thank you, I said, for these, for meeting me, for everything. Thank you, Sarah said, for finding me, for giving me the chance to see what an incredible person you've become, for not hating me. I could never hate you, I said honestly. You love me enough to let me go. That's not something to hate. That's something to honor. We've stayed in touch since that meeting. Sarah and I talk on the phone every few weeks, and we've gotten together several times. She met Linda, which was emotional for both of them, the two mothers who'd shaped my life finally meeting face to face. They cried and hugged and thanked each other, two women who loved the same person in different but equally valid ways. I also reached out to my biological father, James Cooper. That was harder in some ways. James hadn't handled the adoption as well as Sarah. He'd struggled with it, made some bad choices in his 20s, but eventually gotten his life together. He was married now, with 3 kids, working as a construction foreman in Cleveland. When I contacted him, he was shocked and emotional. We've met a few times, though our relationship is still developing. It's more complicated with him because he wasn't as at peace with the adoption decision as Sarah had been. Jessica and I found out 3 months ago that we're expecting our first child. When I told Sarah, she cried tears of joy. When I told Linda, she cried too. And I realized that this child would have 3 grandmothers who loved them. Linda, who raised me. Sarah, who gave me life. And Jessica's mother. My child would be so lucky, surrounded by so much love. Looking back on that Saturday morning when I climbed into Mom's attic looking for Halloween decorations, I can't believe how much my life has changed. Finding those adoption papers was devastating at first, but it also opened doors I didn't know existed. It gave me a fuller picture of who I am and where I come from. It connected me with Sarah, a woman whose courage and selflessness gave me the life I have today. I've learned that family is complicated. It's not always about biology or DNA. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to love you, who show up day after day, who make sacrifices for your well-being. Linda is my mother because she raised me and loved me. Sarah is my mother because she gave me life and then gave me away so I could thrive. Both truths can exist simultaneously. Both forms of love are real and valid. I've also learned that secrets, even those kept with good intentions, have a way of coming out. And when they do, they can either destroy relationships or deepen them, depending on how everyone involved chooses to handle the revelation. I'm grateful that Linda and Sarah and I have all chosen grace and understanding over anger and resentment. My life isn't perfect. I still have moments of anger about being kept in the dark for so long. I still have questions that will never be fully answered. But I also have something I didn't have before, a complete picture of my origin story of the love and sacrifice that brought me into this world and shaped who I became. To anyone out there who's struggling with questions about their adoption, my advice is this: be patient with yourself and with the people involved. Adoption is born from difficult circumstances, and everyone involved is doing their best to navigate impossible situations. There's no villain in most adoption stories, just people trying to make the best choices they can with the information and resources they have. And to birth parents who made the choice Sarah made, who gave up your children so they could have better lives, your sacrifice matters. Your love matters. Your children, whether they know you or not, are shaped by the courage you showed in putting their needs above your own desires. That's not abandonment. That's the deepest form of love. As for me, I'm still David. I'm still the same person I was before I found those papers. But now I have a fuller understanding of my story, and I'm connected to people I never knew existed. My family has expanded in ways I never expected, and my heart has expanded to hold all of it. The complexity, the pain, the joy, the love. Life is strange and beautiful and complicated. Finding those adoption papers in my mom's attic changed everything. But maybe everything needed a change. Maybe I needed to have my world shaken up so I could rebuild it on a foundation of truth and understanding instead of secrets and assumptions. I'm grateful for Linda, who loved me and raised me and made me who I am. I'm grateful for Sarah, who gave me life and then made the hardest choice of her life so I could thrive. I'm grateful for Jessica, who stood by me through all of this and helped me process the most difficult discovery of my life. And I'm grateful for the child we're about to bring into this world, who will grow up knowing their full story from the beginning, who will never have to wonder or question or feel the shock of sudden revelation. This is my story. It's messy and complicated and full of pain and love in equal measure. But it's mine, all of it, the biology and the choices, the secrets and the revelations, the multiple definitions of mother and family and belonging. And I wouldn't change any of it because all of it made me who I am today. Thank you so much for taking the time to read my story. I know it was long, but I wanted to share every detail because I know there are others out there struggling with similar questions about adoption, identity, and family. Your story might be different from mine, but the emotions, the confusion, the anger, the eventual understanding and peace, those are universal. If this story resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. You never know who in your life might be grappling with questions about their own identity or family history. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in our struggles can make all the difference. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your own experiences in the comments below. Have you discovered something about your family that changed your understanding of who you are? How did you handle it? What advice would you give to others going through something similar? And if you found value in this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I plan to share more personal stories about family, identity, and the complicated, beautiful mess of being human. Your support means everything and helps me continue sharing these deeply personal experiences. Remember, your story matters, your feelings are valid, and you're not alone. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this community. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Red Heart.